Thank you, Drew. Thank you. All right. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to see all of you here in the room today. From the very first time we got together with, I think, a grand total of 8 people in our office over Chick-fil-A to here, it is a beauty to see all of the ministers who are serving the people in our community to the glory of God and for the greater good of His kingdom. So today, we welcome you to the 2025 Pastors Appreciation Event, and my topic is about the pastor and his personal finances and tax concerns. I know that sounds riveting. Sounds like something that you're just dying to know more about, or maybe you might be like others who think that sounds like the most boring presentation you could possibly imagine, only possibly surpassed by a detailed lecture of ancient church doctrinal disputes or something along those lines. Well, I have good news for you today. Both topics are actually fascinating, and we're going to have a good time. I'd like to start by just sharing with you a couple things, foundational concepts. But before I get into these foundational concepts, the presentation that I'm providing to you today, I do have an outline with my notes that should be available to you or sent out to you after today. So you don't have to worry about writing down a ton of notes. You're welcome to do so. Secondly, we have a book. This year, we were finally able to publish The Good Steward, Biblical Principles in Wealth Management. And today, I'm grateful to say we actually have a copy for each of you here. We will be providing free of charge to you as a blessing to you and to your church, to your personal finances, copy of The Good Steward. We do have several copies in the back. If you want to pick up extra copies to give to others, we do have those for sale there in the back. Now, if you want to be able to receive some of the information, the copy of the notes, you'll notice on your sheet there are 2 QR codes there. Snap the QR code to put your information in. You should be able to access the downloads, possibly even here during the presentation today. All right. With that being said, let's jump into some foundational concepts about money and stewardship. Now, we teach this in our 3-day stewardship seminar. This is probably the main point that we try to drive home to individuals in the seminars. That is this. We believe that God provides us in His Word 5 key priorities, 5 financial priorities that apply to the way we think about our money, wealth, and possessions. The first of these priorities is because God is our highest priority, our first and foremost allegiance. When it comes to our money, giving is our first and foremost financial priority. We give to the Lord out of all that He's given to us. Now, pastors, my brothers, sisters here in this room, I want you to know giving is not an optional thing for pastors. I know you give so much. You give your time, you give your health, you give your life for the ministry. But you're still, I believe, called to be generous with your wealth and to give to the local church. My conviction and what we teach in seminars is that giving, typically we refer to that as tithing, right? Giving 10% goes to the local church, to the general fund. I do not believe tithing is to the Billy Graham evangelistic campaign. That may be a good thing. It may be a good and worthy item to give money to, but it's not tithing. We'll talk about where something like that might come later in our discussion. Giving goes to the local church, to the general fund. Just a verse for us to consider as we're thinking about generosity in the framework of our finances. Proverbs 3 verse 9, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all of your produce. And I would encourage you to continue reading on into that passage, and you see what God promises to do with those who are faithful and who give. So number 1, we give to God. We give out of gratitude. We give without an expectation of return, but God promises to be faithful to those who are faithful to Him. We give out of love and out of gratitude. But then we have savings as our second priority. We see because God is our first priority, because he is the creator and giver of life, and because he sets the family as his foundation stone for mankind, we believe that savings is our second highest priority. We are to have reserves. We are to set money aside in preparation for our family. Here's the real crux about biblical stewardship. There's a dilemma. The dilemma is this: who provides? God does. And yet God calls you to save and have reserves. The challenge that every steward is going to have is that as you follow biblical principles, as you start building savings and reserves, which is biblically mandated, just read the book of Proverbs once. You can't leave the book without understanding your responsibility to prepare and to save. We easily switch our confidence from the God who provides to the savings account and the investment portfolio. It is the call of this ministry. It is the call of my company. I think it is the heartbeat call of my life to help call Christians to trust in God, not their finances, but save and invest, because it very well may be through the finances that we save that God will be meeting our needs and providing for all that we have. But even if it's not, even if everything you save and prepare for goes away, God's promise is still good. You can trust him. He will provide. Savings. So here we talk about having an emergency fund. Pastors, this applies to you. You need to have reserves. You need to have reserves set aside so that you're not going into debt. You need to make sure that we have funds set aside. We typically talk about an emergency fund. You've probably heard them say, the experts, 3 to 6 months of living expenses. And that's a generally good guidance. The point I'd like for you to recognize is that the amount of emergency reserve really does depend on the stage of life and the financial realities of your life. If you're in a stable church environment where everything's going fine, look, you probably don't have to have a doomsday level emergency fund. But if you know that there are seas that are rough and there are storm clouds on the horizon, I would highly encourage, let's start building up that emergency reserve so that if and when God moves you on for any number of legitimate or not legitimate reasons, that you have reserves. 3 to 6 months of living expenses is a rule of thumb, but we modify that to fit your reality and the kind of risks that your finances or your family situation is exposed to. If you have questions about how does this apply to me, you'll notice that in part of the response list, you're able to sign up for a free stewardship review with one of my team members to help walk through your personal financial reality, to give you guidance on this and any other of the items that we'll be talking about today. So just know there are ways for you to get more information so that you can know how to apply this to your family and your life. So we have, actually, let me go back to savings. We talked about an emergency fund. I would also encourage you, think about a sinking fund or kind of an annual expense fund where you add up all of your irregular bills. These are the bills that come in once or twice a year. So an example of that might be, well, if you own a home, you probably have real estate taxes if you don't escrow. Well, you need to make sure you have funds set aside to pay that bill. What about your homeowner's insurance or your car insurance? By the way, you know that the less frequently you pay those bills, the lower your annual cost is. You guys are aware of that, right? That applies to the life insurance, car insurance, homeowner's insurance. The less frequently you pay, the cheaper the cost is on an annualized basis. So if you can look ahead, see a danger, prepare yourself, you can have the funds set aside through a sinking fund to make sure those bills are covered. It basically spreads out the cost over the course of 12 months rather than you trying to scramble when the bill comes due to make sure that you have the money And again, helps to prevent credit card debt because you're not having to pay it on credit card in order to not lapse that policy. And then finally, there's this little thing called retirement. And these aren't the only categories of saving, but we do need to set aside and reserve money for retirement. I know many pastors who have faithfully served the Lord who have looked at retirement and said, you know what, I don't have to worry about that because Jesus is coming back tomorrow and we're raptured out of here and I'm okay. We don't have to worry about savings. Amen. Let's just charge the gates with a water gun. I don't really know that that's actually faithful and biblical, right? Because we are called to show wisdom. We are called to have reserves and save. So ideally, you'd want to be contributing to a 403B if your church has a sponsored 403B plan. I'm going to talk about 403Bs a little later. There are specific reasons why pastors may want to consider 403Bs as a part of their retirement plan because of their triple tax-free benefit potential. We'll explain that a little later. But regardless of whether or not your church has a 403B, Roth IRAs, saving for retirement through the use of a Roth IRA, can be an enormously beneficial thing. It's $7,000 a year for those who are under age 50, $8,000 a year for those who are above age 50. They can set into an after-tax Roth IRA, and the money grows entirely income tax free. Just a couple verses to think about. The Bible says in Proverbs 21, verse 20, that in the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil, but the fool devours everything he has. Notice I said it's in the house of the wise. It's not the house of the rich. It's not the house of the rich that has reserves. It's the house of the wise. Having savings, having reserves is not a sign of wealth. It is a sign of wisdom. We need to demonstrate the wisdom through having money set aside for reserves and not trusting in those reserves, but trusting in God and doing what He says. Secondly, I'd like to point out Proverbs 22, verse 3, and repeated verbatim in 27, verse 12. And it says this: the prudent looks ahead and foresees a danger, but the fool continues on and suffers punishment. The prudent man looks out and says, I know that at some point my tires are going to wear out, my kids are going to need to go to college, I'm probably going to want to retire, or maybe I'm going to be forced to retire. I need to prepare myself. So in faith, we step into that, trusting God and trying to balance out the variety of priorities in your life. And I know some of you are thinking, look, I don't have money to save. I don't have money to put into retirement. I hear you. And I know that you're not alone. Not even in this room, you're not alone. So if that's you, you don't have the money to save, I'm calling you now to pray about this. Because this is a reality. It's a freight train that's coming at you. And God, in His Word, says we need to be prepared. So have conversations with your spouse. Have conversations with your deacons or elders. Pray about what you can do to make sure that you're able to meet the obligations that the Lord sets before you. Because my brothers, you know this as well as I do. The minister is worthy of double honor. And if that doesn't mean double compensation, it certainly means fair and sufficient compensation to meet one's financial obligations. Talk to your church to make sure that to the extent that is possible, you are calling your people to faithfully support the ministry and the minister. I know that's an uncomfortable conversation. I know that you as a minister talking about finances to the church is an uncomfortable thing. This is in part why the Life Institute exists. We can come in alongside of you to help equip and train your people to think biblically about their generosity and the joy that God calls them into as they give and support the work of God. Giving is not ultimately about it's not ultimately about earning some kind of reward. I think we give because we need to prove to ourselves and to God that God means more to us than our money. It's interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these items later, but let's get to spending. In our categories, right, we have God as number one, therefore we give. Family is number two, therefore we save. Our testimony, reputation is number three. Our community, being faithful where God has planted us, is number three, which is where we come to spend. Give, save, spend. This is the largest part of our budget. This is where the majority of our spending comes in. So just a couple observations for you. Number one, be careful with credit cards. Don't use them. Don't pause. Don't use them. Don't go into debt with the use of credit cards. Pay them off every month. And please don't use your personal credit card for church-related expenses and not get reimbursed. We met a pastor once. He's a great guy, wonderful ministry, and he was putting significant amount of church-related expenses on his personal credit card because the church was going through some hard times, and now he's dealing with $20,000 in credit card bills, 20% interest rate, and he's struggling to be able to prepare for retirement because he's got this debt that he saddled on. It's the church's debt that he's personally carrying. So don't do that. Living expenses. One of the biggest things that we see with pastors is the question of, do I have a parsonage or housing allowance? How does that work? Let me at least say this. If you're renting or you're in a parsonage, that's perfectly fine if you're trying to get your feet underneath you. You're trying to become established. You can be in a parsonage for a period of time. It's not my preferred method, but it's okay to get you going. Ultimately, we want you not to be in a parsonage long term, because when you retire, you're probably not allowed to stay there forever. Or what happens if, God forbid, you die in the middle of ministry? Are they going to let your spouse stay there forever? Think about this in terms of the broader scope of your family and your life. Don't just trust the parsonage to be the thing that you'll stay in the rest of your life. Try to find your own housing independence. Whether it's renting or, my preference would be to purchase something. Part of what that then means is if you're going to buy a home, you have to be very careful. I know homes are getting so expensive these days. I understand and appreciate the complexity of this particular dilemma, especially for pastors. But churches need to keep in mind, you should, pastors and parishioners alike, should not be spending more than 30% of their income on housing-related expenses, mortgage or rent. And I know it's hard right now. I know it's hard. But keep that in mind when you're talking about a compensation package. If it is incumbent upon you to be in the local community in which you're ministering, where your church is based or where the bulk of your people live, then your compensation needs to enable you to afford to live there. It's not rocket science. So think about where you're living and what ministry is calling you to do. And again, have conversations with your people, have conversations with your deacon, your elder, your finance team about how do we get us where we need to be to do the work that God's calling us to do. A note about insurance. We have Brethren Mutual here, and I'm grateful that the PA Church Insurance is here. They're not the ones who are necessarily providing the insurance I'm talking about. They're more like church-based property insurance and liability insurance. You should definitely talk to them. But pastors, you need to have insurance as well. Life insurance, health insurance. I encourage you as pastors, life insurance, there are two different kinds, broadly speaking. You've got permanent insurance and you've got temporary insurance. Permanent insurance goes by the phrase whole life. Temporary insurance uses the term, right? Term insurance. The dirty little secret with insurance is this. Whole life insurance is for your entire life. That means that you are guaranteed to get a death benefit if you pay premiums for the rest of your life. That means the insurance company is guaranteed that it's going to have to pay out a certain amount of insurance if you continue to pay those premiums. What does that mean for the insurance company? Because they are not nonprofit organizations. Number one, it means this. They've got to charge you a high enough premium to justify the risk or the cost of that death benefit. The premium's got to be high enough. And secondly, it means they're probably going to offer you a lower death benefit. I am not anti-whole life insurance, although I think oftentimes they're sold for the wrong reasons and not necessarily the best possible product for all people. They can have their place. Term insurance for most people, for most pastors, is probably the most important first stop on the insurance train. It covers you for only a period of time. If you pay your premiums for 20 years, there is no guarantee that the insurance company is going to have to pay out a death benefit. In fact, they're hoping they won't. You're hoping that you'll survive. That's why the cost of those policies are much, much lower. Life insurance for the sake of your spouse is essential. How much life insurance should I have? I'm glad you asked that question. The amount of insurance you should have, you think about this. For every $4,000 of income you want to replace, shoot for $1 million of insurance. Now, $1 million of insurance through whole life is going to be very costly. $1 million of insurance through term can be much, much more affordable. So $250,000 can replace $1,000 a month in income. $1 million of insurance can replace $4,000 a month in income. You follow that math? It's not really that complicated. If you want to ask me about it later, we can talk about it. All right, debt. Want to make sure that you're staying out of debt, paying your debts off. Use the debt snowball. I love the debt snowball. If you have questions about that, go look at Dave Ramsey. He's got some great stuff on the debt snowball and on budgeting. I will let him address those issues. Offerings is our next category. Now you're thinking through our strategy, right? We give, save, spend, offerings. Offerings is the fourth item. Offerings are for those who are less fortunate than you, having room in your budget to give to worthy ministries and causes or individuals who are in need. I believe it is a call of the biblical steward to look beyond themselves, look beyond their local ministry, and also have reserves for others. This is where, you remember I mentioned the Billy Graham evangelistic campaign? Well, this is where that would come in your budget. If you're convinced that that's what I need to fund, and I've got a client, a great guy who was saved through Billy Graham, and he wants to be able to give to that organization, this is where it comes in his budget. Comes in the offerings category. You want to help a neighbor who lost her job and's got 3 kids at home? Comes in the offerings category. Giving to the building fund, giving to the missions fund, giving to missionaries. This is where it comes. I love the ability of offerings, but it doesn't come before the tithe. It doesn't come before the church. It doesn't come before your family. It doesn't come before your testimony. It comes after those items are addressed. Now, only then, once we have offerings addressed, can we then rightly think about luxuries. Luxuries are not bad. There is nothing wrong with living in a nice house, driving a nice car, having nice things, provided you're living with the 5 biblical financial framework. Give, save, spend, offerings, then luxuries. Now, luxuries is not one of those categories that's got a carte blanche you can do whatever you want with. There are plenty of warnings in Scripture about luxuries, and I think we need to take them very carefully. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about it, but I would encourage you to spend some time in 1 Timothy chapter 6 thinking through what is Paul saying about the love of money being the root of all kinds of evil. Through the pursuit of it, many have left the faith and pierced themselves through with many pangs. Or other passages that are equally prescient upon individuals. I would also then point you to later in 1 Timothy chapter 6. By the way, I've got 2 chapters in the book on 1 Timothy chapter 6. In the second chapter of 1 Timothy 6, we see that it is God who gives all things to be enjoyed. God is not dour, sour, grumpy God in the sky who is sad when he sees you happy. He delights to give good gifts to his children. He, is a father, you don't give a stone to your kid when he asks for bread, right? God's like that. He loves to delight in giving good things to us. Now, here's the trick. We cannot exchange worship of the thing or worship of God for the thing that he gives us. Right? That's the challenge that we see in Romans chapter 1. Exchanging the worship of the Creator for creation. So think carefully about luxuries. Just two really quick quotes about it. In the book, I reference Thomas Brooks. He's got this quote. It says, it says, prosperity. No, I've got it backwards. Look at that. Adversity has slain her hundreds, but prosperity her thousands. Think about that for a minute. Adversity hath slain her hundreds. It's true. Adversity is not a good thing. But prosperity slays even more. Another quote by Cotton Mather says this, religion brought forth prosperity, and the daughter destroyed the mother. True religion, following God, reading the Bible, putting wisdom into practice often leads to prosperity, and prosperity kills faith. Not always. It's prosperity when we put prosperity first. Trust in the Lord, not in your money. These are the foundational concepts I want you to understand. Give, save, spend, offerings, luxuries. Now, let's talk about pastors and retirement, right? That's what you're here about. So, when it comes to pastors and retirement, we talked about 403Bs earlier. They're very, very powerful savings vehicles. 403Bs have the potential for triple tax-free benefits. That means that you can contribute money. Technically, the way this happens is you don't contribute money to the 403B. You allow your church to contribute to your 403B on your behalf. And that is tax-free. You then allow the funds to grow tax-deferred, second tax benefit. And then as a minister, you have the opportunity of taking distributions from the 403B once you're 59 and a half and older, potentially income tax-free as a housing expense. So you obviously have to have housing-related expenses and then offset those expenses with the distribution, allows that to be income tax-free. So 403Bs are significantly advantageous to pastors, but they're a total pain in the butt to run. I personally, at our organization, we have struggled with how to do 403Bs well for pastors because they're expensive to operate, they're difficult to run, and the regulations are ridiculous. I think it's the government trying to kill it. But there are a couple options I wanted to point you to. Number one, we've got Guidestone. If your church is connected with the Southern Baptist denomination at all, Guidestone will allow you for a substantially discounted cost to establish a 403B and use their particular platform and investment. So Guidestone is an option. If you're not a Southern Baptist aligned organization, you may want to consider working with the Master's Plan. That's through Timothy Plan. And they will set up for, I think, a very nominal cost a 403B and allow you to fund and operate the savings vehicle of the 403B. They're a really good organization. We've been happy with what we've seen them do with churches. And if you want to use or work with an organization that will help you get a plan document in place and all the documentation that you need to run a 403B on your own, you can look here at NCLL, National Center for Life and Liberty, and reach out to them. They will actually provide it, again, for a very nominal cost. If you have questions about that in particular, talk to Drew later. So 403Bs, very beneficial. If your church has one, use it. I would prefer that the church puts the money in the account rather than you. If you salary deduct, payroll deduct your contributions to a 403B, it is subject to Social Security tax. If you are in Social Security, which we'll get into in a minute, that's where it comes in. Rather than you put it in, take a pay cut and let the church make the contribution for you, it does help eliminate the Social Security tax. Roth IRAs are super helpful. I encourage you to use a Roth IRA. That is double tax benefit, right? Not triple tax free, but double tax free. The money goes in, has already been taxed, but it grows tax free, and the money comes out tax free. You don't need to worry about housing related expenses or worry about the government taking away the housing deduction or the housing expense deduction for pastors. So Roth IRAs are great, and they also apply for the spouse. If you pass away and your spouse is not ordained, they can't do the housing-related expense for a 403B. But a Roth IRA, anyone, including your kids, can take that money out, income tax free. We also have traditional IRAs, simple IRAs, 401ks. Those are savings vehicles that churches or pastors can use. They're less preferred than the first two methods. But again, they're additional ways of looking at savings. Pastors and taxes are a complicated mess. You probably already know that. Pastors are an interesting set of challenges when it comes to taxes. Number one, are you a W-2 employee or are you a 1099 employee, right? We encourage churches to pay their pastors via a W-2. First thing you got to know is that pastors have this dual tax status. And I know you already know this, I'm preaching to the choir, but for those who may not be aware, when you earn income, you are both taxed as a self-employed individual and as an employee of the church. That means that you owe federal income tax, but you also have to pay Social Security tax, the full 15% on your income. It's a painful, ugly expense. Now, some of you may be opting out of Social Security or already have done so. And in this case, you would not be subject to Social Security tax. That's all the more reason why, guys, if you're out of Social Security, you need to be doubling up on your retirement savings because you don't have a Social Security safety net. It is all on you. At the very minimum, you should be saving 15%. My preference would be 25% of your income should be going towards retirement savings just to replace the safety net that Social Security would have provided to you. Dual tax status, we just addressed that. Be careful about that status and make sure that you're making quarterly estimated tax payments. If you are required to pay Social Security, it is entirely on you to make those payments. The church is not supposed to do payroll deduction for that payment if you are an ordained minister. So set that money aside and pay taxes. Housing allowance. Anything you can deduct as a housing allowance, anything that you don't eat or wear. Your rent and mortgage interest expense technically, the rental value of your home is able to be deducted. Your cleaning your carpets, your furnishing your home, subscriptions, things of that nature can be added in as housing related expense. Housing allowance is excluded from federal income tax. It is not excluded from Social Security tax. That is another frustrating element of your dual tax status. Schedule C for outside work and ministry. If you are doing weddings or funerals or outside ministry related activities, you need to be filing a Schedule C, that's self-employed schedule on your tax return, and that allows you to then deduct the expenses related to those ministries. So whether you need to travel or other related expenses, you may be able to reduce the tax impact through the Schedule C. And Social Security, are you in or out? Guys, in order for you to truly be out of Social Security, you have to have a moral, biblical ground for opting out. For many of you, it's too late. You've already made the choice. You're either in or you're out. Again, if you're out, make sure you're saving substantial amounts to meet that income gap in retirement. The second thing I'll say is that there's currently something called the Clergy Act that's floating around in Congress that, if they pass, would give ministers a 2-year window to potentially opt back into Social Security. So if you are out of Social Security, pay attention to the Clergy Act if you wish to opt back in. If it passes, you may have that opportunity. Tax preparation, please use a professional. Please don't do it yourself. They scare me to death. Pastors' taxes are complicated. They're difficult. Drew Geisey can tell you about the challenges that he's had as a minister dealing with the dual tax status and a side job, a side W or a Schedule C job, trying to figure out how on earth to get the taxes done right and not get in trouble with the IRS. Make sure you're working with a tax preparer who actually understands pastors' taxes. That is critically important. All right, so wind down our discussion. Estate planning is important. I'm not here to steal Jim Smith's thunder, but you need to have a will. Your will should be a Christian's will. A Christian's will includes your testimony, faith in Jesus Christ, as a preamble to it that says something like this: for me to live is Christ, to die is gain, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Know this, that if you read this, I'm with my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. He has fully paid for all of my sins, and I'm calling you, my heirs, to keep close accounts with God, to follow him with all of your heart, and you get the opportunity of maybe sharing a little bit of your testimony of faith in Jesus Christ, and challenge your heirs to manage wisely what you leave behind. A Christian's will doesn't just include the preamble, but it can also include things like, do you want your kids to be in public school, or would you rather them be in private school? Your will needs to direct your executor, your trustees, your custodians to know that information, and you need to make sure it's funded with life insurance or assets to allow them to do so. So a will is very beneficial. It also involves generosity and leaving money to the church. We talk about this in our ministry. We have the last of the workshops we do is on Christian estate planning. This is something we go to great detail on. But you also need power of attorney documents, both financial and medical. Because the reality is you will be disabled at some point, possibly, or you may not be in town and you need someone to speak for you. Have a power of attorney. Make sure you get that up to date. I know I've run through this fast, but this last thing is also important. It's called living trust. Do you need one or do you not? We would encourage most of you don't need a living trust. Your life and your situation is just simply not complicated enough. Prove me wrong. Come up and talk to me. I'm happy to be proven wrong. But most of you don't need it. So don't get swept up with a living trust kind of hysteria. It's not that bad here in Pennsylvania. If you have assets in multiple states, real estate in multiple states, that's when you potentially could find benefit in using a living trust. If you're a public person and you need privacy about your financial affairs after you're gone, that's where a living trust could be beneficial. With that being said, thank you so much. May God bless you in the stewardship of your finances. And I'd like to introvite Drew up here to give some instructions about dinner.